Hello, this is Sinan Camille. I am presenting assignment 3 for Computer Engineering 560, which is Computers and Networks. And today I'll be presenting assignment 3. As part of this presentation, I have JSON and Volta windows open using PuTTY, and I will show you how a server and client can communicate with each other. And I'll be starting by logging into JSON here using my credentials. So the username and then the password. I'm gonna go ahead and write that down here. So, all right, we were able to successfully log into JSON. Now we are logging into Volta. So let me similar password. Just gonna type that in here. Alright, so I was able to log into JSON and Volta, and I'll start off with figuring out the IP address for JSON. So that's by IP route is the command to get that. So as we see, this is the IP address that we are going to need for our demo today. And here we can execute the client code or the client C file. I've already compiled and the C file and everything, so all I have to do is just execute the file using the executable file. So in this case we have client, and then we have the IP address, which in this case is showing on the left side, the highlighted one. So we tap that in here along with a port number, which is 5024. And then here we can do server, but with only the port name or the port number. Server, all right, good. A socket was created, and the socket ID is 3. Here we could execute this one. We can see that the connection was made successfully. If we look at the server one or the server side, we can see that a successful connection was made with the client using this IP address. So in this case, if we go back to Volta, which is the client side, we can see that we were able to send a string. And if we want to exit at any time, we just type in X. So we are going to type in example just to show that it works. So the received string is example. String to send is example reversed. So this is what's going to be sent to the client. And if we see that a client was able to receive this one, and since it's an infinite while loop, it's going to be able to ask us for the input again. So in the assignment, it said to type in my name along with the last name with a sentence that's random. So I am showing my 560 demo, for example. If you see that the received string was my first name, last name, and then the random phrase reversed, and if we see that on the client side, this was able to get sent back to the client, where the client was able to send back the original message. So they're basically communicating with each other back and forth using these commands. Let me also go ahead and show you the code that I wrote for the two files. And let me exit this one. Again, I said to type in X if you're done. So I am done. Type in X. If we see that a new message popped up, it said the client is done sending, shutting down now. So since we tapped in X, that's my string that's gonna disconnect the connection. And if you look on the left side, it said the client has been disconnected, or the client has disconnected. All messages were read, server is shutting down now. So we're able to shut down the system right after the request by the client, which is to shut down the system. So let me get into the server code first. So nano server.c. If you look here, let me explain the code here first, and then we can go back to the client code. So with JSON supporting the server code, if we look down into the code and how it works, we can see that we have a main function where it's checking to see if there are less than 2 arguments, and if they are, or sorry, more than 2 arguments, which if they are, then it's going to say that there were too many arguments provided. As I showed in the demo, I entered the server, the executable file along with the port number. So this is why. And if there's 2 exact arguments that were entered, which is on this purpose, this is the most purpose, we did that. So we are able to create a socket here, and then we're able to see that once the 2 sockets are created, we are giving a message that says socket created, and then along with the socket ID. And here we are able to bind the 2 information that includes the socket object along with the socket address, where it reserves the space for the server to say that the port here was done with this information, and this information will be used for the socket. So here in this code, we check to see if we are listening to the correct socket that's done here compared to the one from the user. And if it's not, then we print an error message that says failed on listen, and then it closes the socket, and then it returns -1, which is shutting down the system. And here it says if the client socket wasn't able to accept this, then it's going to print a message that says failed on socket accept, because this is just saying that the client wasn't able to accept this socket, so therefore a connection wasn't made. Otherwise, we print a message that is successful connection was made, which is in this demo when we saw that we entered this code, or sorry, when we entered the IP address on the side from the client, which is in Volta, we're able to get this message that says successful connection was made with the clients on the side of JSON. So here we are checking if a new entry was made. So in this case, we have a do while that's running all the system, and in this do while, what it basically checks for if an X was entered, and if there is, then which I'll show you here. Or sorry, it's actually done in the client side. So if an X is sent, then what we basically would see is a client has been disconnected. Therefore, a connection is, it's lost or disconnected. And then it keeps on checking to see what the received string is that was sent by the client, and then it does the logic where it checks for the string and what it is, then it reverses it, doing the reverse logic here. So then once it's done, it sends it back to the client with the reverse code, and if that's done, then we send a message when the client requests to shut down the system and close the socket. Then a message would say all messages were read, server is shutting down now. And that's pretty much it for the server code. And again, this print statement just says if there were less than 2 entries were made for the arguments, then it's going to say that there were too few arguments that were provided. So let me go over the code of the client. So let me do nano and then client. So here, sorry, what was this? Oh, that's C. So here we can see that this is the client side. Too many similar logic that was used in the server for checking the amount of arguments. In this case, we're accepting 3 arguments, which includes the executable file, the port or the IP address, and the port name. So we're able to do that here. similar logic on creating the socket and trying to connect it with the server. And here where it's asking the user to enter a string, and if done, to enter X. And then if you see here, this is the character that it checks for. If this was done, then it just closes the socket and it ends everything. And then it just says that the connection is done. And if anything else was entered, then it will be a string that gets taken from the client side to send it to the user. And let's see here. So when we create a socket inside of the client, we are trying to look for other sockets that are available by the server to grab them and make connections. So on the client side, once that's done already, it gets verified. Then it goes through this do while logic, and it's while one, which is an infinite amount of tries to receive or send strings. And this one, if we are done, then it just closes it and shuts down the system. And this statement it just verifies that the client is done and shutting down the system now. And then this one is for if they were fewer than the amount of required arguments were provided, then this message will pop up. So that's part of the code. There were also questions that I would like to answer, and I'll be saying them now. The first question is, what are sockets and which layer do they operate? So sockets are on the fourth layer of the TCP IP network layer. Sockets are established in a point-to-point connection where the start and the endpoint are based on the combination of the port and the IP combination. Second question is, differentiate between TCP and UDP. This assignment is on TCP or UDP. YouTube uses TCP or UDP. So answering the first question is, the differences between TCP and UDP is UDP is less reliable and it's faster and simpler, but it doesn't guarantee transfers. In UDP, or TCP is more for an acknowledgement-based sending and receiver, where TCP is more reliable, slower though, but it requires an acknowledgement mechanism, where in UDP you don't need an acknowledgement mechanism. And also in this assignment we are using TCP, and YouTube uses both TCP and UDP. For example, there are two main functionality for YouTube. First one is the live fed, and the second one is uploading the static videos. So we know that the static videos are TCP and the live fed is UDP. So answering the third question is, what will happen if I use an out of range port number in my code? Will I encounter an error? If yes, explain, and if no, explain. So if an out of an range number port number is entered, then if the number is too low, I would not get the connections to happen between the client and the server. But on the other hand, if a larger number was entered, I would see that there would be an established connection happen between the two of them. So therefore, I don't have an error that checks for that. Therefore, I do have a checker where it checks for the amount of arguments were entered. And then the fourth question is, what's the maximum number of sockets that a client and a server could have? It is 2 to the 16th minus 1, which equals to 65,535 according to Cisco. Thank you very much for watching my demo, and have a wonderful day.